1872, a man who engraved banknotes for a living found the story of Noah's flood in a broken piece of clay. It was written 1,000 years before the Bible, and it was not about Noah. His name was George Smith. He had taught himself a dead language on his lunch breaks. Half the tablet was missing. So he sailed to Iraq to find the rest of it. It killed him. And that is not the strangest thing in this video. There is another tablet, older still. On that one, the boat is round. Not an ark, a giant reed coracle. And the animals still go in 2 by 2. Meanwhile, for 100 years, people have been climbing a mountain in Turkey, looking for the ship itself. In April 2026, a survey team said they had found it. 3 decks, a corridor, a tunnel 13 feet long. The story went round the world. So here is the shape of this. For a century, people climbed a mountain looking for a boat. The whole time, the answer was sitting in a drawer in London. What Genesis actually says. Why everyone climbs the wrong mountain. A century of expeditions. The hill and what it is made of. The scans. And then the tablets and the man who died for one. Start with the text. Most people know this story. Very few have read it. Genesis chapters 6 to 9. God sees the earth is full of violence. He decides to end it. One man is told to build a boat. The building instructions are oddly detailed for Genesis. Go for wood, whatever that is. That word appears once in the whole Hebrew Bible. Nobody knows what tree it means. Rooms inside, covered in pitch, inside and out. 300 cubits long, 50 wide, 30 high. A roof, a door in the side. 3 decks, a cubit is a forearm. Depending on whose forearm you use, that boat is about 130 to 150 meters long. That is the size of a big wooden ship from the 1800s. It is also close to the limit of what wood can do. Build a hull much longer and it starts to bend itself apart. Then the flood. 40 days of rain. The boat runs aground. Birds are sent out. First a raven, then a dove, 3 times until it does not come back. Remember the birds. They matter later. Now here is something most people miss. We hear this story. We do not read it. It contradicts itself. Twice. In one place, the rain lasts 40 days. In another, the water stays for 150. In one place, the animals go in 2 by 2. In another, Noah takes 7 pairs of every clean animal and 1 pair of the rest. That is not carelessness. Most scholars read it as 2 older flood stories joined together. An editor had both. He kept both. So even inside Genesis, this is not one story. It is at least 2. Here is what I am building to. In about 8 minutes, I will tell you what that hill is really made of, and where the fossil wood and the iron brackets actually came from. The answer is stranger than a hoax. Now, the boat comes to rest, and the search begins because of 4 words. The text does not say Mount Ararat. It says the boat rested on the mountains of Ararat. Mountains, plural. That one word has swallowed a century of expeditions. Ararat is a place name. We know what it means because it turns up in Assyrian records as Urartu. Urartu was a real kingdom. It sat around Lake Van. It covered a big stretch of what is now eastern Turkey, Armenia, and northwestern Iran. Mountain country, thousands of square kilometers of it. So Genesis is naming a region. It is like saying a ship ran aground in the highlands. It is not naming the mountain we now call Ararat. That mountain is called Ararat in Turkish. It is 5,137 meters high. It is the tallest point in Turkey. It got the name Ararat much later. Europeans gave it that name. Working backwards from the Bible, local people called it other things. The name on the map is European geography. It's not in the Hebrew text. And that matters because the name decided where everybody looked. If Genesis names one peak, the search has one address. That address is a permanentist cap on a volcano, 5,000 meters up. It is a hard place for wood to survive. Ice can preserve things beautifully when it sits still. A glacier does not sit still. It moves, it grinds. It pulls things apart and carries the pieces away. If Genesis names a region instead, the search area is the size of a small country. You can watch the mistake being built. Medieval travelers said the Ark had survived on a great mountain in Armenia. Marco Polo repeats it at secondhand. Ass a thing, people said. By the time Europeans were drawing maps, the name and the peak were stuck together. Almost nobody pulled them apart again. So for more than 100 years, hundreds of people climbed one volcano. They did it because of a name given by men who had never read Urartu in an Assyrian inscription. The expeditions all follow the same pattern. In 1955, a French businessman named Fernand Navarra climbed Ararat with Hisson. He came down carrying a piece of worked wood. He had pulled it out of Thais. He wrote a book about it. The photographs are good. It is a dark, squared beam. Apperson shaped it. The wood was real. It had been cut by hand, and it was carbon dated. It came back medieval. Roughly the 5th to 7th century AD. That is far too late for any Bronze Age flood. There is an ordinary explanation. There were monasteries and pilgrim shelters on those slopes. Worked wood high on a mountain is not a miracle. It is building material. Then there is the famous photograph. In 1949, an American reconnaissance flight photographed the northwest plateau of the mountain. The picture showed something dark at the edge of a snowfield. Long, straight-edged. It did not look like a rock. The photographs were classified. They stayed classified for decades. That did more for the legend than any expedition ever did. Nothing feeds a story like a locked drawer. They were released in the 1990s. Analysts looked at them properly. Most agree it's a long rock ridge, half buried in ice. That plateau is full of them. Better satellite pictures since have not changed the answer. But the pull of this thing is real. James Irwin flew on Apollo 15. He is one of only 12 people who have walked on the moon. He spent years of his later life climbing that mountain, looking for the Ark. He went back again and again through the 1980s. He was badly hurt on one trip. He was detained on another. He never found anything. He said afterwards that walking on the moon had been easier. In the late 1970s, the search got its most famous figure. But the thing that made him famous had been sitting in a photograph for 20 years. In 1959, a Turkish mapping officer was going through military survey photographs. His name was İlhan Durupınar. He saw a shape in the ground. It is about 30 kilometers south of the summit of Ararat, near Doğu Bayazıt. It sits at around 2,000 meters, and it looks like a boat. Not a bit like a boat, exactly like one. Pointed at the front, wide in the middle, tapering at the back. It is about 157 meters long, 157 meters. That is near enough 300 cubits. That is the whole engine of this story, a boat-shaped hill, the length of the boat in Genesis, in roughly the right country. You can see why it caught on. The man who made it famous was Ron Wyatt. He was an American nurse and anesthetist. He was not an archaeologist, he was not a geologist. Over about 20 years, he announced that he had found Noah's Ark, and the Ark, the covenant, and the place where the Red Sea was crossed, and Sodom and Gomorrah, and the blood of Christ, all of it, one man. His Ark was this hill, and the hill is worth explaining properly. It is not a hoax. Nobody built it to fool anyone. It is a real piece of landscape, and the question of what it is has a real answer. So what is it? Geologists have examined it many times. None of them had anything to gain, and the answer they reach is consistent. The hill is a fold in the rock. Picture layers of rock stacked like pages. Now press down in the middle. The layers sag into a trough. Geologists call that a syncline. This one also dips at both ends, so the middle sits higher than the front and the back. Now wash the soft ground away from around it. This area is unstable. It is full of mud flows. What is left standing is a long, low hill, pointed at both ends. Ridged down the sides, a boat shape, made by folding and rain. And here is the part nobody says out loud. There are other formations like it in the region. This one is unusual. It is not unique. Now the specific claims. Each one has been tested. This is where it gets interesting. The metal brackets and iron ribs are real iron. They are natural deposits of two iron minerals, limonite and magnetite. They sit inside the tilted layers on the sides of the fold. Iron in the rock, lying in lines because the layers are folded. Then the fossil gopher wood. This is the material that looks so much like petrified bark. It is a rock called peridotite. Peridotite forms deep underground. This piece had been crushed and folded under pressure. That gave it a texture that really does look like wood grain. One supposed iron bracket was put under a microscope. It turned out to be weathered volcanic minerals. This is the paper I promised you. It was published in 1996 in a peer-reviewed journal by the geologist Lawrence Collins. And here's the detail that matters. The second author is David Fasold. Fasold had been one of the site's biggest promoters. He had toured with it. He had lectured on it. He had argued for it for years. He looked at it properly. He changed his mind. And he put his name on the paper that said so. That is how it is supposed to work. It happens far less often than it should, which brings us back to April 2026. The story went round the world again. Noah's Ark found. Radar reveals 3 decks, a 13-foot tunnel under a Turkish hillside. It ran in the Jerusalem Post. It ran on Fox. It ran in the British tabloids and across half the internet. A group called Noah's Ark Scans has been working the site for several years. They use ground-penetrating radar. This year they announced results. They are specific. They report shapes under the ground that they read as a 3-decked ship, a corridor down the middle, a tunnel about 13 feet long. They also took soil samples from inside the hill. They say those samples hold more organic material than the ground around them. They suggest that means rotted wood. Let me be fair first, then accurate. Fair. Radar is a real tool. Soil testing is a real measurement. Working one site 4 years is more than most claimants ever do. And saying we have something worth drilling is a perfectly reasonable thing to say. Accurate. Radar does not see objects. It sees changes in the ground. It measures show a pulse bounces back. Denser rock bounces differently from softer rock. Layers of sediment produce bands on the screen. Mineral veins produce reflections, and this hill is a fold. A fold is made of tilted layers, stacked and repeating, so it will produce a lot of lines on a radar screen. Some of them will run parallel, and parallel lines at regular depths are exactly what you see if you are looking for decks. The findings have not been published in a peer-reviewed journal. Independent geologists say the shapes match ordinary weathering, mineral veins, and layered sediment. No worked wood has been recovered. No made object has been dug up. The team says it plans to drill cores and run more tests. That is exactly the right next step. Drill it, pull a core out. Wood is not subtle. If there is cut timber down there, a core will find it. Carbon dating will date it. And then this stops being an argument. Until then, what we have is a survey by an interested party. It has not been reviewed, and it is on a hill that mainstream geology calls natural. That is not nothing, but it is a long way from a ship. Now the other thing, in 1872, a man named George Smith was working in the British Museum. He was reading clay tablets dug out of Nineveh. They came from the library of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal. The city fell in 612 BC. The library was dug up in the 1850s. Smith was not trained for this. He engraved banknotes for a living. He taught himself to read Akkadian in his lunch breaks at the museum. He got good enough that they put him on the staff. One afternoon, he was reading a broken tablet. The text described a man building a boat to survive a flood. The story goes that he got so excited, he started tearing his clothes off in the reading room. That account is secondhand. It may well have grown in the telling. What is documented is this. He announced it in public, and it caused a sensation. The tablet was Babylonian. It was older than the Bible, and it was clearly the same story. That tablet is Tablet 11 of the Epic of Gilgamesh. You can go and look at it. There is a coda to Smith, and it is worth 30 seconds. The tablet was broken. Part of the flood story was simply missing. A London newspaper offered to pay for an expedition to Nineveh to find the rest. Smith went, and against ridiculous odds, he came back with the missing piece. He went back to Mesopotamia twice more. On the 3rd trip, he fell ill. He died near Aleppo in 1876. He was 36. A banknote engraver taught himself a dead language on his lunch break. He found the flood story on a broken tablet. He sailed to Iraq and found the missing piece, and it killed him before he was 40. Here is what the tablet says. The gods decide to wipe out humanity with a flood. One god breaks ranks and warns a man. He does it by talking to a reed wall. That way he can say he never told a human being anything. The man is called Utnapishtim. He is told to pull down his house and build a boat. He builds it with several decks, divided into compartments. He seals it with pitch. He loads his family, his workmen, and the animals. Then the storm. The language is terrifying. The gods are frightened by what they have done. They cower against a wall like dogs. When it stops, the boat is aground on a mountain. Then Utnapishtim sends out a dove. It finds nowhere to land and comes back. He sends a swallow. It comes back. He sends a raven. The raven does not come back. The water has dropped and it has found ground. He leaves the boat and makes a sacrifice on the mountain. The text says the gods smelled it and gathered round like flies. Now compare that to Genesis. A raven, then a dove 3 times. A wooden boat sealed with pitch, with decks and compartments. Aground on a mountain. A sacrifice and a pleasing smell. One thing to be careful about, the version Smith read was composed around 1200 to 1100 BC, but the tablet in his hands was not that old. It was a copy made about 500 years later for the library at Nineveh, and the story is older than both. There are at least 3 Mesopotamian flood stories, and they are related. The oldest of the 2 big ones is the Epic of Atrahasis. It is in Akkadian. Copies date to around 1700 BC. Its flood section is very close to Gilgamesh, Tablet 11, close in shape and close in actual wording. Most scholars think a later editor lifted it in from Atrahasis, and Atrahasis gives a reason for the flood that will surprise you if you only know Genesis. The gods send it because there are too many people, and they are too loud. The noise keeps the god Enlil awake. That is the motive, not wickedness. Noise, older still, is the Sumerian version. It is sometimes called the Eridu Genesis. Its survivor is named Ziusudra. Most of it is missing, but the shape is there, and then there is the one that came out of a living room. In 2014, a British museum curator named Irving Finkel published a tablet. A member of the public had brought it in. It had come home in a soldier's kit bag after the war. It sat in a family's house for decades. It is Old Babylonian. Around 1700 BC, 60 lines. A god tells a manto build a boat and survive a flood. And the boat is round, not an ark, a coracle, a giant version of the round reed boats that were still working on Iraqi rivers within living memory. The tablet gives measurements and materials, coils of rope, a huge amount of bitumen for waterproofing, a floor about 3,500 square meters. It reads like a specification. At one point, the god gives the exact amount of bitumen needed. That is the kind of detail you write down when you want the numbers towed up. And somewhere in those 60 lines is an instruction about the animals. They go in 2 by 2. 2 by 2, on a clay tablet in Akkadian about 1,000 years before the Bible. So what does that prove? Less than the internet will tell you, in both directions. The differences are as sharp as the similarities. In Atrahasis, the flood is crowd control. The gods are annoyed. Then they are frightened by what they did. In Genesis, it is a judgment, and it ends with something none of the older versions have a promise. God ties his own hands. He says he will never do it again, and he hangs the bow in the cloud as the sign of it. That is the argument Genesis is making. Not that the flood happened, that it will not happen again, which leaves the last question. Is there anything underneath all this? In 1929, the archaeologist Leonard Woolley was digging at Ur in southern Iraq. Heck it down through the layers of the old city. Then he hit 2.5 meters of clean river silt. There was settlement above it and settlement below it. He announced that he had found the flood. He had not. Other sites in the region have flood layers too. Shurapak, Kish, Uruk. When they were dated, they came from different periods. There is no single silt layer across Mesopotamia. There are lots of local ones at lots of different times, which is exactly what you would expect on a floodplain between 2 big rivers. And that is the point. This is a landscape where bad floods happen again and again. People living there do not need a worldwide event to produce a flood story. They need one bad decade. There is a bigger idea too. In 1997, two geologists, William Ryan and Walter Pittman, suggested something dramatic. Around 5600 BC, the Mediterranean broke through the Bosphorus. It flooded what was then a freshwater lake. That created the Black Sea and drove out everyone living on its shores. It is an exciting idea. It has also been strongly challenged. Later work suggests the water rose far more slowly than they proposed. It is not settled. What is settled is the big claim. There was no worldwide flood covering the mountains a few thousand years ago. Ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica have unbroken yearly layers straight through that period. Tree rings and lake beds run continuously across it too. Whole continents show nothing. The evidence there is not ambiguous, but a terrible local flood, remembered and retold for 2,000 years until it became the end of the world. That needs no special pleading at all. So let us close the ledger. The hill in Turkey is a fold in the rock, shaped by rain, in a landscape that makes such folds. The iron is iron. The wood grain is peridotite. A team says it intends to drill. If they pull up cut timber, that changes everything. And I will make another video saying so. The mountain everybody climbs was named after the text. The text did not name it, and the text names a whole kingdom, not a summit. And there are two pieces of baked clay, both older than the Bible. One was found in a museum drawer in London. On that one, a man seals a boat with pitch, rides out a flood, and lets a bird go to look for land. The other came out of a family's living room. On that one, the boat is round, and the animals go in 2 by 2. Those tablets are the real discovery. Neither of them was found on a mountain, and they tell you something better than a shipwreck would. 4,000 years ago, people across a whole region were telling each other the same story. About water, about surviving, about what it costs to start again. And one version of it, written last, took that story and turned it into a promise. So here is my question for you. If they drill that hill and find nothing, does the story matter less? Tell me in the comments.